Howdy, everybody. Dr. Andy Woods here. I'm the pastor teacher here at Sugarland Bible Church. This is Pastor's Point of View number 350. This is being released April the 18th, 2025. And as is common, we have a prophecy update for you today. If you look at our preview slide, here are the things that we're going to cover related to Bible prophecy: anti-Semitism, China, and we'll probably spend most of our time there. Number 3, the persecution, which is gearing up, shall we say, against God's people. And all of these are prophetically significant world events. So let's go ahead and start with anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, of course, is the irrational hatred of the physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And prophetically speaking, that is something that God says in His Word will increase and accelerate in the end times. Notice this picture that we typically use to describe this. This is trying to depict Revelation chapter 12, particularly verses 6 through 17. It's dealing with the dragon, or Satan, who apparently still has access to God's throne room, not to worship and serve as he once did as a high-ranking angel named Lucifer, but rather as Satan to communicate and accuse. Certainly the early chapters of the book of Job bear that out. And the book of Revelation predicts that Satan will be cast out of heaven permanently. He'll lose that privilege midway through the tribulation period, and he'll have but a short time. The Bible says he knows his time is short at that point. And what that means is he's got 1,260 days left to do what? To gobble up the woman clothed with the sun and the moon and the 12 stars, a dead ringer for Israel, when you factor in the dream that Joseph had back in Genesis 37, verses 9 and 10. But there, during the second half of the tribulation period, Satan is trying to gobble up Israel, the nation of Israel, because he knows that the kingdom is going to come through Israel, and he's trying to stop the instrument or destroy the instrument through which the kingdom will come. And so it's an amazing chapter there. Speaking of detailing, if you will, the height of spiritual warfare against the Jewish people in the last days. And that passage is among many others that we could cite, demonstrating to us that anti-Semitism will reach an increasing fever pitch as we move closer and closer to the end time scenario. And that's the very thing that we're seeing developing in our world: the hatred for the Jew. With that being said, notice this particular article from Newsmax, April 7th, 2025. It says Pennsylvania Democrat governor, and keep in mind that he ran against Mastriano, I believe is his name, a Republican in the general election a year or two ago. And how different things would be in Pennsylvania had Mastriano won that race. But it says this, Mastriano being a conservative Christian, says this: Pennsylvania Democrat Governor Josh Shapiro recently announced his state is giving $5 million to a mosque where an imam had previously declared, quote, "the Jews are the vilest people," close quote, it was reported. The grant was targeted for the mosque's community center. It was the largest grant ever awarded to a Muslim organization, as is reported by WHYY. 5 years earlier, the Al-Aqsa Islamic Society was forced to apologize for posting hateful Islamic sermons by an imam delivered at its mosque, declaring that Arabs were superior to all races, that the Jews were the enemies of Allah and the vilest of all people, Front Page magazine reported. The imam also appeared to call on Muslims to take over the world. I mean, these are the type of sermons that are given, and I put sermons in quotation marks, obviously, because this to me is not a sermon. I mean, this is a statement about hatred and political conquest. But apparently this is what is normal in this particular mosque there in Pennsylvania. And here comes the governor, Shapiro, awarding $5 million to this mosque. I mean, it's staggering to think about. And this is kind of a story that's related to some of the other issues that we dealt with on our prior Pastor's Point of View, number 349, about the Islamicizing of the United States of America as a potential explanation as to why the United States of America, under the influence of Islam, does not come to Israel's aid in the events of the Gog-Magog invasion. And so this is just more evidence of the Islamization of the United States of America, where this kind of $5 million payment is made by a Democrat governor to a mosque that promotes anti-Semitism, hatred, and promotes the idea that Muslims should conquer the entire world. You know, what's interesting is the liberals and the left used to talk about the doctrine of a strict wall between separation between church and state. Boy, they talked about that all of the time, related to Christianity's involvement with government. Don't bring your Christianity into government. Don't post the Ten Commandments in the schoolhouse walls, because there's a strict wall of separation between church and state. And they use that over and over again to get Christianity removed to a large extent from the public square. It's interesting that now that Christianity has been removed and now they're promoting Islam in its place, that they don't talk about the strict wall of separation between church and state anymore. They were highly selective in how they used that particular legal doctrine coming from allegedly the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. I am not a believer in a strict wall of separation between church and state, because those words are not in the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. They're made up. But I do believe in a separate sovereigns doctrine, that church and government have completely different functions. But unfortunately, that was misconstrued over the course of time. You can thank the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, for that one, otherwise known by me and others as the Anti-Christian Legal Union, for inventing that doctrine, the strict wall of separation between church and state. And the left used that constantly to get Christianity out of the public square and basically make it sound like Christians and Christianity can have no influence in the realm of government. Well, now that Christianity is removed, suddenly the left doesn't talk about the strict wall of separation between church and state, as they're seeking to elevate Islam. And this $5 million payout by the Pennsylvania governor to an anti-Semitic mosque shows you how inconsistent they are. I mean, could you imagine if this money went to one of the most conservative Christian churches in America? The left would be screaming bloody murder. But when the money goes to an ideology that helps the left, like Islam, suddenly they don't care about the strict wall of separation between church and state anymore. Just another sign of the times, and how anti-Semitism is not just being rewarded in our country, or not just being tolerated in our country, I should say, but it is being rewarded. This kind of anti-Semitism is happening at a global level. Notice this particular screenshot. This was dated March 26, 2025, and we're just going to read the headline. It says, Norway's Jews hide their identity in order to receive medical care. In an unprecedented letter to health authorities, Jewish leaders warn of a deeply concerning trend not experienced since World War II. And here we are just 80 years or so, is it, from the Holocaust? You would think that anti-Semitism would be a thing of the past, but here it is, rearing its ugly head again globally and worldwide, where Jews in Norway are so hated. They're so hated by the people, they're so hated by the establishment, that they have to pretend they're not Jews in order to make sure that they get medical attention. They've got to hide their Jewishness so that they can receive medical help in Norway. That's a stunning development, and they're saying we haven't seen anything like this since World War II. Why is it that just 80 years since the Holocaust, anti-Semitism is coming back? I mean, haven't we learned our lesson? Well, the only book that can answer that question for you is the Bible. Because based on the Revelation 12 passage that I talked about a moment ago, we learned that anti-Semitism doesn't originate ultimately from the human mind. It's a deep-seated demonic ideology. And because demons are fallen angels who cannot die, Luke 20, I think it is, verses 25 and 26, talks about that. Angels don't die. It's these exact same satanically orchestrated demons that orchestrated anti-Semitism in World War II. They're recycling the philosophy because of a satanic agenda to blot out Israel, because Satan knows that the kingdom one day, during which time he'll be bound for 1,000 years, he doesn't want the kingdom to come. He knows that the kingdom will come through the Jews, and so he seeks to blot out the nation of Israel so that the kingdom can never come. This is a trend that is troubling and it's uncomfortable to talk about, but I see it as accelerating as we move closer and closer to the end time scenario. So I bring it to your attention in a prophecy update. Let's talk about the kings of the East for a moment. Go to our next bullet point, which I believe is China. China is involved some way, somehow. We have here our tribulation judgments chart, and here I'm speaking of the sixth trumpet judgment and the sixth golden bowl of wrath judgment. I believe that the sixth trumpet judgment starts a process in the tribulation period that's concluded with the sixth golden bowl of wrath judgment. Notice what trumpet number 6 says. Notice Revelation 9, verses 13 through 16. It says, "Release the 4 angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates." And then verse 16 says, "And the number of the armies of the horsemen." So this is a human army. A lot of people try to convert these into demons. I don't underestimate the influence of demonic activity during this time period influencing this army. But ultimately, it's a human army coming from the east. The army doesn't come out of the abyss the way the locusts do in the 5th trumpet judgment. This is a group of people that come from east of the Euphrates River on horseback. The abyss is a temporary holding tank for demons, but that's not what's being described here in trumpet judgment number 6. It says, "And the number of the armies of the horsemen was 200 million. I heard the number." So that's the beginning of a process that starts with trumpet judgment number 6. Here is what I think is the end of the process. Revelation 16 verse 12, this has to do with bowl judgment, number 6, at the very end of the tribulation period. It says, the sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river, the Euphrates, and its water was dried up so that the way would be prepared for the kings of the east. So this army is not coming out of the abyss the way the locusts, who I think are demons, are coming out in the fifth trumpet judgment. This is an army that's coming from the east of the Euphrates River, demonically influenced, no doubt, but humans riding on horseback. And as you look at our map here, we've got Iraq or Mesopotamia circled. We call that area Mesopotamia because in Greek it means between the rivers, meso, between, Potamia, rivers, as in Potomac, the Potomac River, named after this, one of our rivers, Mesopotamia, which is essentially modern-day Iraq. It's between the rivers, the Euphrates and the Tigris. It's called Shinar in Hebrew. It's an area that the children of Israel were taken into during the Babylonian captivity, Daniel chapter 1 and verse 2. So it's dealing with this army of 200 million riding on horseback coming from the Far East, the Orient, in other words. And they're making their way into the Middle East, into northern Israel, into the valley and mountain of Armageddon for the final climax of the ages. And they're being summoned there by none other than the devil and the demons themselves. Revelation 16 verses 12 through 16 talks about it. So as you look at the map, what you'll see is that the Euphrates River is that geographical marker that demarcates the remote east or the Orient from the Middle East. So as this army is marching, and they're already coming because the sixth trumpet summoned them. By the time you get to the sixth bowl judgment, as this army comes, Satan himself and the demons supernaturally dry up the Euphrates River to expedite the path of this army of 200 million. And as they make their trajectory, they exterminate a third of the world's population in the process. Keep in mind that by the time you get out of Revelation chapter 6, a quarter of the world's population has been eliminated. And now, Revelation 9, with this army's march that I'm describing, a third of the world's population is exterminated. So 3/4 was left by the time you get out of Revelation 6, and now a third is taken away, and you do the math on that. And by the time you get to Revelation 9, half of the world's army population, due to this army, I should say, is eliminated. So this is a staggering, stunning army from the east with incredible power. So who is this army from the east? Dr. John Walvoord, in his commentary, says, and I'll just read the last sentence here in this paragraph. He says, the rising power of the Orient in our day, such as Japan, India, and China, as well as lesser nations, make such an invasion a reasonable prediction. So I'm of the perspective that China, some way, somehow, plays a role in this Eastern invasion. And so, of course, if I'm right about that, some disagree. But if I'm correct on that, we should see a bellicose, belligerent, anti-Western, anti-Israel China developing in our lifetime into a regional, soon-to-become global power. And that's exactly the kind of thing that we see in the news constantly. China is, in other words, fitting into prophetic orbit. You can't even get through a news cycle without seeing China mentioned some way, somehow. So notice this particular article from Breitbart, April 8th, 2025. It says, China moves to formally end Christian missionary activity. I mean, we know from our missionary support at our church that we just can't send missionaries into China like we used to in some of the good old days. They've come under more and more pressure. More and more restrictions are placed on them. And now China is to a place where she doesn't want any missionary activity from Christianity from the West at all in China. That fits the type of posture that China would have in the last days, according to Bible prophecy. The article says the autocratic Chinese Communist Party, CCP, is imposing severe restrictions on Christian missionary activity in the country, arguing loyalty to the party usurps all other beliefs and credos. The regulations, which will take effect May 1st, prohibit foreigners from preaching, sharing their faith, or establishing religious organizations without official government approval, persecution.org reports. The move continues a long history of antipathy towards organized religion in the single-party state. The CCP has long viewed independent religious activity with suspicion, arguing that religious loyalty is at odds with ultimate loyalty demanded by the Communist Party. The government labels independent religious activity as cultish and extremist, regardless of its theological roots, and demands that all Christian religious activity take place within the confines of the state-run church. Yeah, you can have church, but it's got to be state-run. And the cameras have to be on at all times to monitor what the preacher is saying at the hands of the state. See, in this church, Sugarland Bible Church, we have cameras, but our goal is to try to get the message out into the world. With the CCP in China, it's the exact opposite, where they use the cameras to spy on the preacher. And there are certain topics you can talk about as a preacher in China, in a church. Certain topics that are off limits. Why? Because that's the nature of communism. That's the nature of Marxism. In the Marxist and communist system, the state is God. And it doesn't want any competitors. That's why Marxists are always trying to destabilize the family, destabilize private property, because those are competitors to the state. They don't want a kingdom within the kingdom. They want the state to be God. And if that's your mindset, then you've got to stamp out a knowledge of the true God, the triune God, Jesus Christ, God in human flesh. You've got to stamp that out. And so everywhere communism goes, it always attacks Christianity. You look at some of the most progressive, liberal, borderline Marxist people in our own nation, the United States of America, and they don't have a kind word to say about Christianity. We covered on a prior show Bernie Sanders, an open socialist, and how at one of his recent events he had a singer or a musician come, and the person, all they did was attack God, attack Christianity, and attack the Bible. You know, that is the face of the modern Democratic Party. If you put the Democratic Party in charge of the United States of America, anti-Christianity will quickly result. You look at some of the bluest states in our country, and there you see our churches coming under duress as pastors are being told you need to marry homosexuals, as so-called hate speech laws are being invoked, for the purpose of censoring, editing what pastors can say in our churches. We had here in the city of Houston, Anise Parker, I think her name was, a few years back, essentially demanding that pastors involved in some litigation hand over their sermon notes to her for inspection, a very pro-LGBTQ plus mayor. And this is the nature of progressivism. This is the nature of the Democratic Party. This is the nature of socialism. And this is the nature of the final form of all these things, Marxism. It's always going to persecute Christianity because Christianity is looked at as a rival. If the state is God, then you can't have any competitors. And that's exactly what's happening in China. In a statement on the Chinese messaging app and social media platform WeChat, China's Ministry of Public Security boasted of increased spending on technology and manpower to combat independent religious organizations and to stamp out all faiths. In January, Christians were told to prepare for similar assaults on their faith. As Breitbart News reported, the CCP declared that it is intent on rooting out every pocket of independent religious thought and persecutes Christians by shutting down house churches, stripping children from Christian families, and monitoring every detail of Christian citizens' lives. The surveillance society, in other words. And let's drive a wedge between Christian parents and their children. It's kind of interesting how that's even happening in the United States, as in the public school system, as we've documented many times, children are being transitioned from one gender to another without any knowledge of by the parents that this is happening whatsoever. This is the nature of Marxism. This is what Marxism does. Read Karl Marx, The Communist Manifesto, and you'll see it very clearly. In China, they're trying to encourage believers to abandon the faith and worship dictator Xi Jinping. Well, you don't worship Jesus, worship the Chinese communist leader. And if that's the goal, then you have to stamp out a knowledge of the true God. I believe that this is prophetically significant. This is the type of character that China would evidence in the last days. We see China in the news constantly as Trump is trying to sort of level the playing field regarding international trade with his use of tariffs. Here is what President Trump, April 9th, just uploaded onto Truth Social, his social platform. He said, based on the lack of respect that China has shown to the world's markets, I am hereby raising the tariff charged to China by the United States of America to 125%, effective immediately. At some point, hopefully in the near future, China will realize that the days of ripping off the USA and other countries is no longer sustainable or acceptable. Conversely, and based on the fact that more than 75 countries have called representatives of the United States, including the Departments of Defense, Treasury, and the USTR, to negotiate a solution to the subjects being discussed relative to trade barrier tariffs, current manipulation, and non-monetary tariffs. And these countries have not, at my strong suggestion, retaliated in any way, shape, or form against the United States. I have authorized a 90-day pause and a substantially lowered reciprocal tariff during this period of 10%, also effective immediately. Thank you for your attention to this matter. In other words, China continues to be a problem related to unfair trade practices, justifying, in Trump's mind, this United States of America tariff against China being brought up to 125%. Why is it we're seeing more conflict between China and the West? Why is it that we're seeing more conflict between China and Israel? Why is it that we're seeing constantly, in our headlines, the ambition of China to have more and more influence on American public policy? Why is China in a trade war with the United States of America? Why does virtually every headline seem to revolve around this issue? And it relates to the fact that God said this day would come. There would be an Eastern regional power in development that would come into the land of Israel in the last days, capable of furnishing an army of 200 million, and China fits the bill. That's why China is in ascendancy in our time period, because China and its existence and behavior and character is another one of the many signs of the times that we can look at, showing us how close we are to the return of our Lord Jesus Christ to this earth. With that being said, let's go to our final bullet point that we want to talk about in this session, and this has to do with persecution. We know that worldwide persecution in the tribulation period is going to break out against God's people. We see that predicted in Revelation chapter 17 and verse 6, dealing with the harlot. It says, "I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. When I saw her, I wondered greatly." Now, this is the great Babylonian city and system that will dominate the earth in the end times. We know that she will dominate the earth by way of influence, because verse 15 says, "He said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues." Those four nouns, when you look at them together in the book of Revelation, always communicate globalism, universalism, etc. These are the same categories that Christ died for, Revelation 5 verse 9. If Christ's death is unlimited for every person on the planet, and those same four nouns are used to depict the harlot's influence in the last days, this is talking about a global system which will be religious in nature, because this woman is called a harlot. In the Bible, harlotry always represents false religion. And as this harlot coming from the city of Babylon grows in influence, she will kill so many of God's people, the witnesses of Jesus, the saints, not the church. The church has already been raptured. John could have said the church. The word church, ecclesia, is used 19 times pre-rapture in Revelation 1 through 3. But these are the converts that will be won to Christ in the tribulation period itself. That's who the saints are. God's people were called saints in the Old Testament, long before the church existed. So don't confuse saints with church. When you see the word saints in the Bible, you got to figure out what saints are in view. Is it Old Testament saints, church age saints, or is it tribulation period saints? And here we're not dealing with church age saints or Old Testament saints. We're dealing with tribulation period saints, because the church is in heaven already. That's who the 24 elders are in heaven before Jesus opens the seven-sealed scroll, Revelation 5, bringing these judgments to the earth. But apparently this city and system of false religion will kill so many of God's people during this time period, yet future, that she will be portrayed as being drunk with their blood. So it's a very clear picture of persecution accelerating in the end times. I want to share with you at this point a few articles showing you that this persecution is already to some extent alive and well. And these come out of Europe. I have one article dealing with Ireland and two dealing with Britain. I find this interesting because as you look at this statue here, Daniel 2, this is what Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel both saw. The final form of the Antichrist's rule, which is personified here by these 2 feet mixed with iron and clay, 10 toes, sort of a 10-region, 10-king confederacy arising out of the cultural inheritance of ancient Rome. Why do I say that? Because the feet are connected in the statue to the legs of iron, which represent ancient Rome in this prophecy. So the feet connected to the legs show us that the feet are going to rise out of the legs. If the legs is ancient Rome, then the feet would represent the cultural inheritance of ancient Rome. That will be the seat of totalitarianism of the Antichrist's one world government. And so these stories of oppression coming out of Europe, coming out of really nations and countries that continue to be considered Western-style democracies, that type of totalitarianism coming out of those kind of countries really shouldn't surprise us, because God says the Eurocentric empire of the Antichrist, yet future, will be extremely oppressive and totalitarian. So notice this particular article from the Irish Examiner, and it deals with someone named Enoch Burke. And it says more than 40,000 pounds has been seized from Enoch Burke's bank account on foot of high court orders enforcing the payment of thousands of euros in fines owned by the school teacher the court has heard. 2 of Mr. Burke's family members, Mother Martina and Sister Amy, were removed from the courtroom by the guardi during the hearing. Previously, following an application by the Attorney General, Mr. Justice Nolan made an order appointing a receiver to receive Mr. Burke's salary and a garnish order over his bank account up to 79,100, I think that's pounds, the amount that was owed by the teacher over his continued failure by court orders prohibiting him from attending at Wilson's Hospital School in Westmeath. So this guy, Edmund Burke, is in a lot of legal trouble, sounds like, doesn't it? What's his crime? What did this guy do that was so bad? Embezzlement, fraud, assault, battery. Did he injure somebody physically? Did he steal something? What did he do that was so bad? Notice what the article says. The school dismissed him over his conduct when he protested about what he said was a requirement to address a transgender pupil with they, them pronouns. So that's the seat of the controversy? I mean, you're dealing with someone that didn't use a person's preferred pronouns when they transgendered, allegedly, from one gender to another. So we're going to garnish his wages, throw his relatives out of the judicial hearing, or they can't even see it. We're going to fine him into the ground. We're going to cause him to lose his job, and that was his crime. It says Mr. Burke, who says he is standing up for his Christian beliefs. There's a problem. You got a guy in the public school system there. I believe this is in Ireland, saying, you know what, I can't refer to a transgender with the pronouns they prefer. I have to use the pronouns that God gave them biologically, at birth. And because he won't do that, he's in this world of legal trouble. So the article says, Mr. Burke, who says he is standing up for his Christian beliefs, claims his constitutional right to religious freedom has been breached. You got that one right. His constitutional rights have been breached. Mr. Burke spent 512 days in prison for failing to comply with a court order prohibiting his attendance at Wilson's Hospital School. I read something like this and I say, you've got to be kidding. We're going to persecute someone, prosecute someone, drag them through the mud because they're not using the preferred pronouns of a transgender. And this is happening in a Western-style democracy. This is the type of oppression and totalitarianism that the Bible predicts would arise in the last days in the Antichrist Eurocentric empire. And it gets worse. This particular study here, or article I'll give you here, I think this one comes from Britain. And here's the title of the article from yahoo.com, March 31st, 2025. And when you hear this headline, you won't believe it's true, but it is true. Toddler kicked out of a nursery school for being transphobic. This is totalitarian insanity. The article says a British toddler was kicked out of a nursery school after being accused of being transphobic or homophobic, according to local media reports. The child, aged 3 or 4, was kicked out of an unnamed school nursery for being transphobic, the Telegraph reported on Monday. How transphobic and homophobic can you be when you're, 3 years old, 4 years old? And who makes that determination? How can you even ascertain what's going on in the heart of a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old? Apparently these people think they can figure that out. And here this toddler gets kicked out of a nursery because of it. It's interesting that this child his age is 3 or 4. What that shows me is they're into this indoctrination machine, and they want to indoctrinate everyone into this new morality, this DEI morality, this LGBTQI plus morality at the earliest age possible. Not even going after kindergartners anymore. We're going to start the brainwashing process in nursery school. And if we deem certain children are non-compliant, they get kicked out of the nursery. I mean, it's amazing. The article says every once in a while, the extremes of gender ideology throw up a story that seems crazy to believe. And a toddler being suspended from nursery for so-called transphobia or homophobia is one such example. Helen Joyce, director of advocacy at Sex Matters, told the newspaper, quote, teachers in schools and leaders involved in this insanity should be ashamed of themselves for projecting adult concepts and beliefs onto children, close quote, she added. Now listen to this. Author J.K. Rowling, you know her from the Harry Potter series, who has spoken out on trans issues, took issue with the suspension. Quote, this is totalitarian insanity. If you think small children should be punished for being able to recognize a gender or misgendering, sometimes this is called dead naming. You don't use someone's preferred pronouns that have transgendered. Rowling says you're a dangerous zealot. Is exactly who these people are. They're dangerous zealots who should be nowhere near kids or in any position of authority over them, she posted on X. I say to J.K. Rowling, thank you for speaking up. I'm not a fan of the Harry Potter series. I think it opens the door to the occult. But that issue notwithstanding, it's interesting how we're now looking at the J.K. Rowlings of the world as the conservatives who are speaking out for common sense on this gender surrender, insanity, totalitarianism that apparently Europe is moving into. The article continues, and it says, Lord Young, the director of the Free Speech Union, told the newspaper, quote, "It beggars belief that schools are suspending young children as young as 5 for breaching their transphobia policy. I would have thought if your ideology is so rigid it justifies you punishing toddlers for not complying with it. That's a powerful argument for discarding it in favor of something less dogmatic." Close quote. The people that are promoting this are dogmatists. They are absolutists. They are DEI fundamentalists, as we might call them. And this is the kind of thing happening in Europe. Let me give you one other issue related to totalitarianism in Europe, and this one comes from the Daily Mail. April the 4th, 2025. Says this: a woman is jailed over a racist migrant hotel tweet after Southport stabbings, and she's denied temporary release to see her daughter, age 12, and her ailing husband. So this particular individual made a big mistake there in Southport. There was sort of an Islamic stabbing, and she basically got on X, or what used to be called Twitter, and she says we need to export all of these Muslims, deport all of these Muslims out of the country. And she had that tweet up for 4 hours before she took it down. And as it was up, the authorities took screenshots of it and used that as evidence to come and arrest her. And now she is rotting away in a jail cell. And she can't even get out of the jail cell to visit her 12-year-old daughter and her husband, who is basically at death's door. And what was her crime? I mean, did she kill somebody? No, she just expressed a political sentiment. I mean, she expressed it, in sort of an aggressive way. She used some profanity and things like that, but she was accused of violating this hate speech code that they have over there and accused of stirring up hatred against migrants and immigrants. The article says a woman was jailed for 2 years after she tweeted about the Southport riots, having been denied temporary leave to see her 12-year-old daughter and sick husband. Lucy Connolly is currently serving a 31-month sentence for a post made last summer where she spoke of mass deportations and setting fire to asylum hotels for all I care. And she's expressing a sentiment. I don't think she's calling for violence. She's frustrated that these people are allowed into her country to commit these crimes, stabbings, and no one seems to want to do anything about it. The comments came in the wake of the knife attack on a Southport dance class on July 29th, in which 3 children were killed. And in the midst of false claims, the attacker was an illegal immigrant. Connolly's post, which she later deleted, reads, quote, "Mass deportations now set fire to all the blanking hotels full of these blanks for all I care." She later added, "If that makes me a racist, so be it." The childminder from North Hampton was subsequently arrested and put behind bars, but now police chiefs are being criticized for denying Connolly temporary leave as she has been waiting for 4 months to secure release. This is despite one prison expert describing her as the ideal candidate for such a release. She also referenced the stress being placed on her sick husband, Ray, a conservative counselor for West Northamptonshire, who is suffering from bone marrow failure. The 42-year-old had taken her racist post down within a few hours after she uploaded it last summer, but that was not before it had been viewed 31,000 times. And screenshots had been taken of it. Speaking on the process, Ian Atchison, a former prison governor who has advised the government on extremism in jails, told the Telegraph he was concerned by apparent foot dragging over consideration for release on temporary license. Many more risky individuals are walking free as a result of Labor's emergency release legislation. Birmingham Crown Court heard further investigations by police and found other messages from Connolly in which he referred to illegal immigrants as boat invaders. Since the verdict, there have been claims Connolly was a victim of a two-tier justice system, and that her sentence was disproportionate. Richard Tice, the deputy leader of Reformed UK, said, quote, "Lucy is the victim of a two-tier justice system because she is white. And Sir Starmer ordered the judiciary to impose stiff sentences in August." In other words, this woman, and I don't necessarily agree with what she said and the manner in which she expressed herself, but I mean, you're going to make her a criminal for that? For expressing a politically incorrect opinion? The article goes on and it says, last year, see, this is a trend. This is a trend taking place in, I think this is Britain. Last year, a father of 3 was also jailed at the Northampton Crown Court for 38 months on August 9th after reposting part of Connolly's message. So people that reposted what she said during that 4-hour window are jailed. Tyler K., 26, of Ellifield Court, Northampton, admitted a charge of publishing material intended to stir up racial hatred. Passing sentence on K after he pleaded guilty, Judge Lucking told him, quote, "You posted as you did because you thought there were no consequences for yourself from stirring up racial hatred in others." Quoting the judge, "The overall tone of the posts clearly reveals your fundamentally racist mindset," close quote. The quote continues, quote, "I'm sure that when you intentionally created the posts, you intended," see, this is the judge reading a person's mind, allegedly, "you intended that the racial hatred would be stirred up by your utterly vile, repulsive, racist, and shocking posts that have no place in a civilized society." Now, folks, I'm not in favor of stirring up hatred against anybody, but what does that actually mean? If I express a sentiment against the ideology of Islam, does that mean I'm stirring up racial hatred? By the way, Islam is not a race. Islam is an ideology that transcends race. So when people call anti-Islamic statements racist, they have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. If I say Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life online, no man comes to the Father but through him, is that stirring up racial hatred against non-Christians? I mean, you can go absolutely crazy and insane with these loosey-goosey laws related to hate speech that apparently are now predominant in Europe. And now you're being punished for thoughts. Not what you do, but what you think and what you say. Now, as far as I can tell, that is a reversal of Europe's historic stand for free speech. This is one of the things that our Vice President J.D. Vance brought out in a recent speech, I believe in Germany. He basically made the statement that Europe as a whole is moving away from what it once used to understand as free speech. And the truth of the matter is, if you're going to have a free society with free speech, you have to put up with people that express themselves in a clumsy way. Or you have to put up with sentiments that you don't agree with. And if the law is not going to allow people to do that, then you really are not living in a free society. And of course, these laws can be expanded to include a number of sentiments that may not be racist at their core, but just politically incorrect. So I bring this to your attention related to totalitarianism rearing its ugly head in Europe. I think this screenshot we've had up a little earlier, but let me reiterate this. Dealing with the Lucy Conley case. It says British mother is sentenced to 2 years in jail for an X post. Lucy Conley took to X to express her anger after learning an Islamic migrant murdered 3 British girls. Obviously an event that would upset people. So she expressed herself with a post that stayed posted for 4 hours. This screenshot says over 1,500 people were arrested for their social media posts, and Lucy was just sentenced to 2 years and 7 months for stirring up racial hatred, close quote. So Muslims kill people. Lucy Conley says, let's deport them, and uses a lot of sort of graphic imagery as she's expressing her sentiment. So she's under lock and key as we speak because of it. And the rules related to being let out, we would call it on furlough or something like that, to visit her 12-year-old daughter and ailing husband are denied to her, although that same privilege is given to other criminals in the same system. So she is being unintentionally and unfairly targeted in every way, shape, or form. And as God is my witness, it's not going to take long to take these laws and bend them around, they're so loose, into criminalizing any politically incorrect speech whatsoever. And this is the new Europe. And God help us when this kind of mentality reaches our shores here in the United States of America. It's setting the stage, I believe, for the persecution of the last days. Let me take you to one other fast article under persecution as we get ready to wrap up here. This one is from cruxnow.com, April 7th, 2025, and it says a report says terrorist Nigerian forces killed over 20,000 Christians in Nigeria's southeast. It says a new report of over 20,300 Christians have been massacred in southeast Nigeria since 2015. According to the Catholic-inspired NGO International Society for Civil Liberty and the Rule of Law Inter-Society, the killings were carried on by a plethora of jihadists, Muslims in other words, jihadist organizations, including the jihadist Fulani herdsmen, the Niger Delta jihadist inhabitants, and the jihadist Fulani bandits, the Fulani Muslim vigilantes, as well as the Nigerian military deployed to the region. The article goes on and talks at great length about these massacres of these Christians in Nigeria. 20,000 of them killed. Just a quick question. Have you run across any news agency or outlet that has reported this study? I mean, to me, it's not just underreported. It's unreported. I mean, you have to go on the internet, do searches and research of that nature to even see that such a thing is happening. Nobody talks about it. Nobody seems to care. It's almost a media blackout. Even on conservative outlets, I don't hear Fox News. I don't hear Newsmax. Maybe I could be wrong about that. I just haven't heard them talk about it. But this kind of thing should be shouted from the rooftops, and it's not. Because when you engage in mass killing of Christians, nobody in places of influence seems to care. And this is setting the stage for Revelation 17 and verse 6. Massive martyrdoms to the point where the woman or the harlot will be drunk with what? With wine? No, but with the blood of the blood of the saints. So we've looked at a lot of different issues in this particular prophecy update. Putting up our review slide, we've dealt with anti-Semitism. We've dealt with the rise of China, and we dealt with the trend towards persecution. We never like to end our broadcasts without giving people a note of optimism and hope, because there is hope in all of these things. It's in Titus 2, verse 13, which says, looking for the blessed hope and the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ. As the late Adrian Rogers said, frequently the world is growing gloriously dark. Because in the midst of these dark spiritual trends and physical and political trends that I've been trying to talk about in this session, is the bright hope of the rapture, where Jesus promises that before God's wrath breaks out on planet Earth, and it will, Jesus is coming in the pre-tribulational rapture of the church to rescue his own from the earth before the wrath of God hits. And that's our hope. That's what we're looking for the blessed hope and the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ. And that promise only applies to people that know Jesus personally. And there's a way to enter into a relationship with him. It's to trust in what he did 2,000 years ago for our sin debt, to make a relationship with him possible. His final words on the cross, and we're getting ready to think about these things a great deal this month as we move into the triumphal entry Sunday, and then that's going to be followed by Resurrection Sunday. You know, we're in that season where these things are being celebrated and commemorated. Jesus 2,000 years ago bore the wrath of a holy God in our place for our sin. He tells us not to try to fix this problem ourselves, but to trust in what he did. And once a person trusts in that, which is another word of saying believing, they are tied into God's promises. The sin debt has been removed. They have glorious promises and a glorious future, not the least of which is participation in the imminent, any moment appearing of Jesus in the rapture. So I hope as I'm speaking, many people will be placing their personal faith and trust in Jesus Christ. A few infomercials by way of closing. We would encourage you to get the Andy Woods Ministries app in the App Store. A lot of people have written to us and they love that app. And it's got all of our content there. So check that out. Free download. Also, you can enjoy Pastor's Point of View in podcast format. Just type in Andy Woods Ministries into your podcast search engine and our podcast will show up. We would encourage you to go to our website, andywoodsministries.org, where you can sign up for our show notes. All the links that I use will show up in your inbox every time we post a Pastor's Point of View show, so you can research these articles on your own. All of these things are free of charge. And then if you're interested in seminary training, I would encourage you to take a good hard look at the seminary that I'm the pastor of, Chafer Theological Seminary. Go to chafer.edu to check that out. Check out also our journal, our academic journal, dealing with key academic subjects that relate to the type of theology that we promote here. The new journal is going to be out in the future. It's going to have many great articles in it. One of the articles that will be in it is an article by myself on the apostasia of 2 Thessalonians 2:3a, and how that is actually a synonym for the rapture. There's been a lot of controversy on that, and I try to lay out the case why I think that actually is a rapture passage. And then my new book, The Bible and Your Vote, is out, teaching Christians how to vote biblically. Get a hold of that. There's a QR code there. You can find it on Amazon, because the midterms are coming. And we need to be salt and light as God's people in the midst of our voting. So with all that being said, thank you for watching Pastor's Point of View. Thank you for listening to Pastor's Point of View. And Lord willing, we will see you next time. God bless you.